Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello again, and thank you for joining us on IT Pro TV, helping you learn wherever you go. I'm Zach Memis, and I'm your host as we continue on with CompTIA A+ 902 Troubleshoot PC Operating Systems Part 2. We had a Part 1. If you didn't see that, make sure you do. And the person bringing us all the information is our IT Pro, Wes Bryan. Hey, Wes.
Hey, how you doing, Zach?
Good.
Great to be here, and that is right. I talked way too much in the first part, but all kidding aside, we have a lot of stuff to go through, and Windows really doesn't make my job easy. When we talk about troubleshooting our PC operating systems, a lot of times it's really not the operating system that's causing the problem. And I certainly don't mean end users. Well, maybe in some cases malware, again, can cause these problems as well. But sometimes it's hardware issues, just like we've seen in 901. Go back and, we've talked about some of the different hardware issues that you can see. And this is really where you can tie it together with our operating system utilities. So one of the things that I kind of want to recommend as well is it doesn't matter if you're taking the 901 or the 902 exam, watch them both. Watch them both before you take either exam because, again, hardware, to troubleshoot hardware, a lot of times you need your software. If something goes wrong in your software, a lot of times it's your hardware, so they kind of run hand in hand. I don't know about the chicken or the egg syndrome here that's going on, but one usually necessitates the other. So
hopefully you don't have a chicken or an egg inside your
Yeah, that's right, for sure. So let's go ahead and we're going to dive right back in. Remember in the first part we were really talking about things like your proprietary crash screens. We talked about the BSOD or the blue screen of death. Pinwheel is something that you see more in the Mac operating systems, and we'll definitely be looking in other episodes into the Mac operating system and briefly in Linux as well. We also talked about failure to boot. Again, we were talking about some of the things that can be, the problem there. Problematic is an incorrect boot sequence set in the BIOS or UEFI, Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. Remember, they're both firmware platforms, right? One's older than one's the newer one, if you will. Could be a USB device, non-bootable device that's plugged into a USB port, and the operating system's looking for the master, or not the operating system, but the UEFI or the BIOS is looking for that master boot record there and isn't finding it. Improper shutdowns, spontaneous shutdowns and reboots, right? All of this can happen. And what we left you with was really booting into things like our system recovery options, right? Or our system recovery environment. And, well, there might be a couple of reasons that this happens, right? We talked about the boot sequence, so you can kind of understand how the boot sequence goes. We'll recap that real quick. Go back and watch the first part if you want a little more in depth, right? Boot MGR, it looks for the winload.exe that turns around and looks for the NTOSKRNL. Do keep that in mind that that's the normal boot process. Every time the boot process happens, the recovery environment flag is set. The moment you log into the operating system, that's when the boot process has successfully finished, and it's not until that happens that your boot process has finished, right? So if you don't get to boot into your operating system, then the next time it reboots, what's going to happen is the boot manager is going to see that recovery flag, and it's going to throw you to the screen we left off with in the last episode, this one right here, right? So we have the recovery options, right? And notice it says, it looks like Windows didn't load correctly, right? It says, do you want to try again? And you can try again. I'm not going to try again because in all fairness, Windows is going to reboot itself. A lot of times it'll reboot itself just fine, right? It'll clear out anything that's cached in the background and it'll boot successfully. But we want to show you some of the advanced repair options. And again, these could be in things, you could do this through a repair disk as well. If you have your installation disk or if you create the repair disk inside of the Windows operating system, it'll get you get you to the same location. It's nice that Windows has it built in today so that it's a failover, right? Zach, you mentioned that in the first part, that it's kind of like a fail-safe, if you will. So let's go ahead and we're going to show you, let's show you what the recovery environment and the recovery options, system recovery options have. Again, we could continue to Windows 8.1, right? I don't want to do that because this will be a very short episode if I do. Or it says troubleshoot your PC. Notice it says reset or refresh your PC. That's another thing that you can do, right? Reset, this is kind of like your reinstall repair option, right? If you will, you can essentially reinstall Windows, keeping all of your files and folders in place, or if you want to completely reset your PC or refresh. Let me make sure I get this right. Reset your PC means let's reinstall the operating system. Let's keep your files where they are and intact. Or you could refresh your PC, and what this does is you lose your files and you reinstall a fresh instance of Windows. Now, what is this how does this benefit you? All right. And make sure, again, reset, remove all of your files. And I had that backwards. I always get that backwards, right? Reset is to completely remove all of your files. Refresh says, hey, you can refresh it, but you keep your files. Now, why would I do one over the other? All right, well, if I do a refresh, right, and what I don't do is remove my files, sometimes viruses, sometimes bugs, sometimes things that cause file corruption actually sit in the user profile. The user profile are where my files are, including things like temporary files. Well, if I don't remove those, they could be the thing that's causing the problem. So it's also one of the less invasive methods. So I would start here. And if that doesn't work, then you say, well, hopefully you've run backups. If you haven't, check out our backup episodes, right? It's part of system maintenance, and that's why you want to maintain it, because
everything.
Everything, that's right. So if you want to reset your PC, then what you can do is you can remove all of your files, and then you can actually import all of the files from backups back into your machine. So, but again, with the reset, you're going to lose everything. So do keep that in mind. All right. Now, the other thing that I want to look at is the advanced options here. All right. And there are a few different things that we can run. All right. One of the things that we can run is what's known as the system restore. All right. If we run a system restore, this is where we have to have a restore point. Let me see. I'm not sure if this has a restore point, but let me go ahead. We're going to actually run, and it requires me to log in as the admin. That is required because you're essentially going to open up files that are in the operating system. So you do have to authenticate.
And Wes, this is where you can choose a backup time, a time and date, maybe. That's
right. Very good memory. That's right. That's exactly what it is, Zach. This is going to set you to an earlier configuration point. And honestly, ladies and gentlemen, I can't remember if we installed a driver. I'm pretty sure we have a backup point because I have done some Windows updates to this machine. And when you do Windows updates, it creates an automatic restore point. So I'm pretty sure, yeah, there we go. Yep, and like I said, Windows updates when it runs. So I could restore my machine if I needed to an earlier point in time using the system restore here. Now I'll save that for another day. Just wanted you to know that it's there. So I'll cancel out of that and I'll go back into my troubleshoot, and I want to go into my advanced options.
Yeah, back in the olden days, they had Gateway Go Back.
Oh yeah,
I used to use that often.
Yeah, and really, Zach, you're right, because in the earlier days of Windows, you would go to a lot of these third-party utilities, right? And I'd have to go and I'd have to pay a manufacturer, a software manufacturer. I'd have to go to somebody else, right? And then I would pay them a price to get their software that I could then use in order to recover Windows.
Scrubbers.
Well, I have to say, Microsoft got very, very smart, and what they said is, you know what? Rather than having to go to a third party to take care of this, we'll go ahead and we'll bundle some of this functionality into the operating system itself, and now you don't have to go to third party. All right, so the other thing I want to look at too in some of the other system recovery options that we have is the startup repair. Now with the startup repair, one of the things that we can do is we can actually allow Windows to automatically try to fix things. And if you'll notice, it says fix problems and keep Windows from loading. And that's sometimes important. Sometimes you'll have things like your boot configuration data is missing. I'm going to show you a little bit more about that because they call that out here on the exam objectives too. But it's BCD, boot configuration data, essentially is the settings that define how the operating system load. So when the bootloader and all that boot process that we're talking about needs to know what's the operating system I load, where do I find boot MGR, where do I find winload.exe? I got to find it on the hard drive. It looks to the boot configuration data to find that information out. It's a couple of different ways that we can do this. We can allow Windows to try to fix the problem automatically, and it'll do its startup repair. The other thing, which is what I'd like to show you with missing boot configuration, is we're going to go to the command prompt, and that's up here too. Now the other thing that can happen too with it could say the missing operating system too. A missing operating system might not be the fact that the operating system is missing at all. Remember, with boot configuration data, it points you to the winload.exe, and the winload.exe turns around and finds the kernel. Well, guess what? If boot MGR can't find winload, we can't find the operating system, you get the missing operating system. So startup repair can sometimes fix this as well. So let me go ahead and show you some of the other things that you can do too. So for instance, command prompt. I can launch into a command prompt. All right, now I apologize ahead of time. Usually what I like to do beforehand is I like to adjust the fonts here so you guys can see these a little bit. It's not in satellite view. But being that this is a pre-installation environment, there's no way to set this ahead of time. Keep in mind, this is what I've talked about in other episodes as being a memory resident operating system, so it's only running in RAM at the time that I boot into it. So I'll have to do a minor adjustment here. And again, I do apologize ahead of time for having to do this live on camera, but at least you guys will see how to do it.
Live action debugging.
That's right. So we're going to go ahead. We'll give you a little bit more real estate. Remember, we've talked about command prompt in other episodes. We're going to do a CD / here and CLS. We'll clear the screen here and kind of give us something to work with. All right. Now, if you end up having problems with your operating system, you could run something known as BCD edit to see if you can find your operating system. All right, now BCD edit allows you with the enum option, it's short for enumeration, says, hey, I want to see the BCD. All right, now you'll notice, look at these files that I was telling you about as part of the boot process. I mentioned Windows Boot Manager, right? Well, here's the Windows Boot Manager. Here's what we're talking about, boot MGR, right? The boot MGR, it shows me that the boot manager is on partition C, it is present, and it is ready to go. All right, well, remember I told you the bootloader as well? Well, look at the bootloader. What is it called? Well, here's the Windows bootloader. And it is in Windows /system32 / and we see winload.exe, right? This is what's going to look for the kernel to find it to bootstrap the operating system. So I can see that it is there. Now, if I needed to fix it, if I knew that this maybe there was something messed up with this, right? Some kind of problem. I get the missing operating system. Well, I can actually, let me just clear the screen here. I can run something, and you have to do this from the system recovery options. I'll let you know. BCD edit is in the operating system by default. It is a tool that you can find. This next one is only in the system recovery options. It is not native. It isn't native to the Windows command prompt, and that's called bootrec. Oops, I typed it twice here. So bootrec, all right, and if I do a /?, actually I know what I want. I could just type rebuild BCD, all right, and that would fix the boot configuration data. That's one of the great things. It's a boot recovery, right? It's part of the system recovery options. But here, let's just kind of show you again as well. Maybe the master boot record, the BIOS doesn't find the master boot record, right? And I need to repair the master boot record. Well, if I run my bootrec /? here, you can see that I do get an option that says fix MBR. And we could run that, right? I could do a bootrec /, and we could do a fix MBR. And just that quick, it fixes the master boot record. All right, now what if the boot partition, all right, needs fixed, right? So the master boot record defines how we boot the operating system. That's the boot code, but what if the container that holds the boot code, we have a problem? Well, I can fix that as well, right? I could run the same utility. Instead of running fix MBR, I can run a fix boot. And very, very easy, right? These things run really quick. We're talking about very, very small text files. But then I can also run, if it's the boot configuration data, I could run rebuild BCD. All right. Now, notice that it took a second, right? All right. So and it told me total identified operating system installation 0, right? You'll see that if it finds one, if it finds an operating system that isn't already located in the BCD, again, missing operating system, you'll find that result here. It'll say 1. This might seem a little confusing because it says total identified operating system 0. Well, operating systems that aren't already listed in the boot configuration data. Well, it says 0. That means boot configuration data is just fine. Now, I believe there's a Scan OS as well on here too, so I just kind of mentioned that because we mentioned all the other ones too. All right, so that's a little bit about what you can do with BootRec. Now, there is another one that I want to mention too, some of the tools that they call out, and that's the System File Checker. And I'll tell you what, let me clear the screen here and get back at the top so you guys can see this. Again, I apologize kind of ahead of time for this matted screen here, because remember, we are in a memory resident operating system, but we have what's known as the SFC. All right, now SFC is a little bit different than check disk. Remember, check disk, CHKDSK. That checks the logical integrity of the entire file system, all files. SFC, don't let it confuse you on the exam, that's System File Checker. Doesn't care about your files, doesn't care about other files that aren't system files. SFC, we end up repairing just your system files, and you might have to run it. So you'd run SFC space / scan now. All right, and it does. All right, now notice that it tells me, and let's be careful with this one. I'll show you another way that you can run this. Notice that it says there is a system repair pending, which requires a reboot to complete. Keep in mind that we have certain flags that are being set in the boot process right now that might run contrary to a diagnostic program allowing it to not allowing it to run, and that's what you're seeing here. So what it's let me know is that restart your machine, boot into your machine, and then run SFC, and it will restart the machine, and it'll do a system file. It'll run the system file checker. I'll show you guys that in a second. All right. So that's something that sometimes can cause problems as well. Now, the other thing that you can do, and let me go ahead and close that down. The other thing that you can do here is in the recovery options, there we go, you can also boot into what's known as safe mode. All right. Now, there's a couple of things that you got to keep in mind. This might happen automatically. If it happens automatically, chances are in MS-config you've run into a diagnostic mode and you've set it and forgot that you set it. And when you restarted the machine, it boots into safe mode. Remember that, like we've said about MS-config in other episodes, if you boot into safe mode through MS-config, it is persistent across reboots, which means you have to go back in there and turn it off. With the system recovery options here, it's only a one-time deal. If I reboot this machine, right, and I don't go back into the recovery options, I'm not going to boot back into safe mode. Let me show you how you guys can do that too. So, startup settings here. We're going to go ahead and we're going to choose that. All right. And notice it's going to restart to change Windows options. This is actually modifying the BCD a little bit. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll let this machine reboot. All right, and now notice that we have some options here. All right, now we've got a couple things that we can do. All right, we can boot into low resolution mode if we want, right? So if we're having this, there might be a couple of reasons that you might do this. Like, so for instance, notice that there's an enable safe mode with command prompt. If you have a missing graphical user interface, that could be a telltale sign that something's wrong with your video card. Could be a video driver that's causing it as well, right? Because of that, I just needed to see the command prompt. I know something's wrong with the graphical user interface. It's failing to load. Doesn't load the graphical user interface. It's failing altogether. So what happens? Well, I can boot into command prompt. I get the text editor, and it's Windows without the GUI, without the graphical user interface. And that could be something that you want to do. A couple of reasons: either missing the graphical user interface, if you will, or failing to even load it. In this case, we're just going to go ahead and what we're going to do is we're going to enable safe mode. Now, you got to be careful, because when we enable safe mode, certain services will fail to start. All right, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that could be good and how that can be bad. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to choose el número 4. All right, and we're going to launch into safe mode. Now, when we launch into safe mode, what is safe mode? All right, well, safe mode, you are still booting Windows. All right, now again, I apologize ahead of time. Notice we have some mats here. That's because we're not loading the graphical user interface drivers. They're going to fail to boot. It's going to fail to load the graphical user interface because I might want to be fixing the GUI. And in this case, what Windows is doing is it's saying, hey, I'm not going to load your graphics driver, right? I'm going to give you a generic VGA driver, right? And that's just generic, runs with all devices, so that if the driver to your graphics card is causing the problem, you can actually see that here. Right? At least work with your operating system, I mean. All right, so notice that we can see some things that are kind of unique to this interface, right? This is how I can tell that obviously we're in safe mode, right?
Because it says safe mode.
It says safe mode, right? Now, there are some things that we do have to worry about, right? So if I right-click on our Windows tile and I go to Computer Management, I want to show you some of the things that can happen with your services, right? Sometimes services will fail to start. This could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. In this case, it's a good thing because we're the ones that are doing it. We are saying anything that isn't required to start Windows isn't necessary in a diagnostic purpose, right? Let me show you an example. By default, automatically inside of Windows, the print spooler service starts up automatically and runs. If I'm fixing a computer and that computer is failing to boot, I don't care if the print driver is working or not, the print service is working or not. So in safe mode, it shuts it down. Who knows? Maybe it's the print service that's causing the problem. Well, let's eliminate that and at least get you into Windows so that you can do some kind of diagnostic or fix Windows, right? So let me show you here. So if I go down to print spooler, notice that it is an automatic startup type, but notice that it says start. That means it's stopped, right? I can't stop it because it's already stopped. Well, that is good, right? That is not a bad thing, right? Our graphics driver, right, for the graphics card, it isn't loaded either. Because again, it could be the thing that's causing the problem. It could be the reason we needed to boot into safe mode to begin with. Well, if it's causing the problem and isn't necessary to run the operating system, let's don't include it. Let's not start it up. So again, that could be a device failing to start, right? The device that's failing to start is your graphics card, but that's okay, right? That's fine. And more appropriately, it's actually the driver that's failing to load. Let me also show you signs of that as well. So if I right-click on my Windows charm here and I go into Device Manager, you should see inside of Device Manager, notice my monitors here. It says generic non-PMP monitor, and it's giving me this. It says status not available for this device when Windows is running in safe mode. Well, that's okay. I don't really care about that, right? That driver isn't loading to the graphics card. Notice what is loading. Basic display driver, right? Again, it's giving me the ability to eliminate things that aren't necessary to run the operating system, so at least I can get Windows started so I could come in here and I can do some diagnostics. All right, the other thing that we could do too is we can also, and while I'm in here, I'll go ahead and run this. If I go through the run line, I can actually type msconfig.exe, and here is your msconfig or your system configuration utility. All right, now notice that msconfig right now is set for a normal startup type, right? Load all device drivers and services. Well, you can see we're in safe mode. What's going on here? Well, we actually modified the BCD. All right, we told the boot configuration data, this is how we want you to boot. We didn't modify the system configuration, so this is temporary what we're doing now. You might boot into safe mode, right? And that could be an accident in the fact that your boot is set to safe boot, minimal. All right, now it seems cryptic. All right, but that's essentially booting into safe mode. That will do exactly the same thing that you see right here, but you've done it yourself inside of the operating system for the purposes of diagnosing a driver that might be a little bit problematic. Maybe not serious enough that it's rebooting or blue screening the machine, but it is giving you maybe some quirky resolution, and you're like, well, let me see if I can diagnose this. I can still get into Windows, but let me see if I can eliminate that, right? Process of elimination. So I could come in here and I could launch msconfig, and what I could do is actually manually define a safe boot. Alternate shell would just do safe boot or safe mode, if you will, with command prompt. Don't worry about Active Directory repair. We're not worried about that for this exam. Network does safe mode and initiates the network adapter. These first two, your network adapter will not turn on. The device will fail to start. All right? Again, because maybe it's your network driver that's causing the problem. Maybe it's your network stack. Maybe it's the network TCP/IP protocol stack that might be causing the problem, and the reason you're not even getting network configurations at all. Could be the problem. Or might have nothing to do with the network driver. Maybe the fact of the matter is you want to boot into safe mode, get your operating system loaded, and have the network adapter loaded up so that you can connect to the manufacturer's website, even through this low resolution mode, and actually pull down an updated, non-corrupted driver and fix the problem. You install the driver, you restart the machine, you're no longer in safe mode, and you're good to go. At least we hope so. That's the goal. All right, so that is a couple of things that you could see inside of your operating systems as well when it comes to booting into safe mode. Now, there's one last thing that I kind of want to tackle here inside of our operating system, and I'm gonna have to try. Let's see if I can try this inside of our system recovery options. I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to see if I can actually get into the recovery options. I'll tell you what, we're going to go, let me show you in Windows 8. I don't know if we get our charms menu here. Yeah, we still get our charms menu. Sometimes it eliminates some of the things that you can do even in Windows. I want to show you how you can get into the recovery environment and you can actually force the machine into the recovery environment rather than having to do like I did in the first episode where I was spontaneously rebooting the machine to create the problem. I can actually force it to go into recovery mode. And from the recovery options, and I went to the charms menu. I know I did that kind of fast. PC
Lucky
settings,
charms.
That's right. Update and recovery, and then from here I can go into recovery, and there is the advanced startup here, and we'll go ahead and we'll restart now. And notice what it did. It takes us right into that troubleshooting environment. I want to show you another thing that might happen. This is very, very hard to recreate today. Any of you guys that have been in Windows going back to the earlier 90s, Windows 95, Windows 98 as well, might have seen that this problem would happen, and that's something known as a missing DLL. The missing DLL, what happens is when you're uninstalling one piece of software and it removes a common DLL that's actually used by other applications because it's thinking it's the only thing there that's actually using it. And when you install that, uninstall that application, it takes a DIL that two other applications needed to use.
Well, you know, Wes, I'm an old guy, and I wanted to ask you about this. I think you might be leading up to that, but defrag.
Yeah, defrag is going to be one that we're going to go ahead and we'll probably have to save this, unfortunately, for a part 3 because we've got some more things to talk about. But Zach, I do want to just kind of mention, one last thing about, like I was talking about the DLL message. This one's hard to recreate here. In fact, I've tried before, and sometimes I can get it in a recovery mode where I try to launch Windows Explorer from the recovery mode, and the permission sets doesn't allow it to go down and grab the DIL file, but a lot of times that doesn't even work. To try to replicate it and show you guys it. Sometimes when you have a missing DIL, you don't even know that it's going on, and you don't get a message anymore. Earlier, back, like I was saying, in the 90s with Windows 95, 98, and stuff like this. Well, even right up into like Windows 2000, if you would uninstall that video game that was on your PC, it would install or it would uninstall a common DIL that some other machine or some other application was using. And then that's when you would get the missing DIL. Sometimes today you don't even get that missing DIL file message. In fact, let me show you here on the computer. I have deleted purposely, again, to try to create this problem. There are, down here in Internet Explorer, there are some DILs that are actually missing in here. One of them I think is called like pdm.dll, and you don't really even see the message, but if I try to launch Windows Explorer, notice what's going on here. Notice how it's not even launching up. Notice that we're getting that spinning pinwheel, if you will, or Cheerio as I like to call it, and it's really not doing anything. So you don't even really get the missing DIL message. It's just the fact that it's missing, right? And it's causing the application here not to function correctly. So I wish I could replicate this for you, but this is one of these ones that if it does end up happening, uninstall the application unless it's Windows. You might have to do it's like for instance, this is Internet Explorer. You might have to do a reset of your PC refresh or PC reset. If it happens to be an application that's looking for a DIL and you go to launch the application up and it says missing DIL, chances are all you have to do is uninstall the application, reinstall the application, or do a repair. That's why they talk about inside of the objectives, they say uninstall, repair. What do they actually call it out here? I forgot exactly what they term it here. Uninstall, reinstall, repair. Okay, so uninstalling the application, reinstalling it, puts the dill back in there, and sometimes you can go to the program location. Let me show you one more time here. If I right-click on my Windows tile, go to Programs and Features, sometimes you'll see applications. I wonder if VMware, yep, there we go. So notice that you have this option, right? You can uninstall it, basically you reinstall it, or you can even do a repair function. And you'll see that a lot of times it'll have its own little dialog box here, gather a little information, and it's going to ask you, what do you want to do? So sometimes that can happen with your missing dills. Again, it's kind of hard to generate these messages. But just one last little thing I want to throw in there. That's a great question about defrag, because we do have to talk about it, but it looks like we're going to have to save this for part 3.
Troubleshoot PC Operating Systems Part 2. There's a Part 1. Now there's going to be a Part 3, and there'll be a lot more in the CompTIA A+ 902 series. Make sure you watch all the videos. You'll be glad you did. Great job, Wes. Thanks a lot. And thank you for watching IT Pro TV. Remember, a good IT pro is always learning. I'm Zach Memis.
And I'm Wes Bryan.
And we'll see you soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.